Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to special episode 265.1 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Renna. The show notes are located at continuefit.com. It's where you can also learn about my new book, Be Like the Best. Be Like the Best is a guide to reaching the top in the fitness profession. It is 50 interviews with top fitness professionals on how they achieve success, how they defined it, how they overcame some obstacles, what are some of the habits and traits. And then after each interview is what I call a Be Like. And a Be Like is basically just an action step or a challenge to help you be like the best. And it's all based on a takeaway from that interview. Now, right now, today's October 17th. It launches October 18th. We've been doing pre-orders, and anybody that pre-orders gets bonuses. One of the bonuses, right away, you get a Kindle ebook or PDF version of the book, so you don't have to wait for it to come. We're doing a Be Like workbook, PDF, so you can get the PDF once it releases next week. And then we're also giving access to 10 of the audio interviews that I did for the book. And that brings me to today's episode. That's what this episode is. One of the interviews that I did, it's Nick Winkelman, one of my favorite coaches, was with me early on in the Strength Coach Podcast doing the art of coaching. He had an amazing career. One of the first people I thought of when I thought of this book. So going back to those bonuses though, even though you're probably going to miss the bonus because by the time you listen to this, that's okay. Because you're a podcast listener, if you send me an email to belikethebestbook@gmail.com, send me the receipt, forward the receipt that you bought the book, I will give you access to those bonuses. So I appreciate you listening to the show, and I will give you access. If you do buy the book, forward that. Send it to belikethebestbook@gmail.com. You can find out all the information at belikethebest.com or on my other site, continuefit.com. All right, this is a great interview. It went pretty long. Nick always has a lot to say, a lot of valuable stuff, lots of takeaways from this one, so I hope you enjoy it. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Nick Winkelman. And today I have on Nick Winkelman, who is the head of athletic performance and science for the Irish Rugby Football Union. He's a former athletes performance and exos performance coach and director of education, where he was responsible for developing and managing an education department that served the professional development needs of the international exos team, in addition to thousands of coaches worldwide who engage through the Exos live mentorship programs, I was one of them, and their online Exos Performance Specialist certification. As a performance coach, he ran the Exos NFL Combine Development Program, and he supported a diversity of athletes across sport and the armed services. He's an internationally recognized speaker on topics pertaining to skill acquisition, coaching science, movement skill development, and athletic profiling. He also has publications through the NSCA, the UKSCA, and the IDEA Health and Fitness. Nick, thanks for coming on.
It's always an honor, my man. Thank you.
All right. Well, you know, a lot of us, and I talk to a lot of people, obviously, and your name always seems to come up about like people that they want to see or want to talk to or want to be like, to be honest with you. I want to be like Nick. And that's really because of I think people respect your path. They respect the way your professionalism and your integrity. And you know, like I remember 10 years ago when I went to Exos and it was athletes performance at the time, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, like just the knowledge and the passion. I thought you were successful back then. And you know, like the things that you've accomplished now in your career, just went over the bio, obviously is incredible. Talk to us, though, about how you define success.
Wow. Well, let me say, it's all good acting. Obviously, I'm in the wrong field because I should have gone into acting because that's all that was working back then when you first went through the mentorship. but I appreciate it. No, it means a lot, and it has been an incredible journey. I think the success question is an important one, and I have thought about it quite a bit. And I think probably how you define success over time changes. I think like many people, when I first started, I defined success by things that were external, right, to me. So the job that I had, the accolades that came with the job, achieving degrees, whatever it might be, training more athletes, bigger name athletes. I think that's all part and parcel to your early definitions of success. It's kind of how you benchmark yourself. You benchmark yourself by what you do and what you achieve. And I do think that's part and parcel to the success or the defining success journey. However, now I really think that I define success by, the personal satisfaction I get from what I do. And what I mean by that is if I can wake up every single day excited to go into work and leave work feeling fulfilled and excited to start again in the next day, I feel I've created a world for myself where I am successful. And for me, it just relates back to those intrinsic pieces. And John Wooden really defined success well, and you'll probably have other people bring it up, but something to the effect of it's doing a job at such a level whereby you feel that you've given it your best. And, when you go home at night, you can put your head on the pillow, and the pillow really is the defining feature of success. Can you fall asleep easily at night? Are you excited to wake up the next day? So I always found that quite interesting. But for me, rambling here, I think it is the intrinsic satisfaction that comes from what you do. And in that moment, I think you're being successful.
Now, like you said, it is an evolving process.
Yes.
And before, obviously, like I said, too, is, here you are, we're looking up to you, even that early stages of your career, we're like, wow, here he is, head of education at a place like Athletes Performance, who, it's not exactly easy to get that gig. You better know what you're doing. When did you start feeling like you were becoming a success?
Wow. I still feel like I have so much more to give and so much more to do. I'll be honest with you, Anthony. That idea of I've achieved it, I've reached it, I am successful, really doesn't permeate my thinking a whole lot. I think I noticed at certain time points in my career that people found value in what I was doing. And I guess as I found that people saw value in what I was doing in those moments, you could say that I was marking that as, one notch on the successful belt. So when you look at that, for me, it started way back in college when I was a personal trainer, and I'd give a cue and someone would give me that look like, oh, that makes sense. And they'd feel their biceps, right, in a way that they had never felt before. For me, Anthony, that was step one in success. And for me, success is moments, right? It's the small things in life that build up to what we might call the macro success. But for me, micro success is just getting incrementally better every day, reflecting and doing things a little bit different, exploiting your strengths and building on your weaknesses. So, I don't mean this to be facetious. Quite literally, I was quite attentive to what I was doing as a coach. And anytime I did something that had a successful response from a client or from someone in an audience, I marked that as successful. I logged that as a behavior I wanted to repeat. And I've simply just tried to build on that incrementally every day of my career.
Yeah, I love that because it's so true. I think a lot of us probably do that and don't even realize that, obviously, because we start to see it. And then we say, oh, yeah, I got to use that again. And then, you might use it on somebody else, like those cues, and that doesn't work. And then you might take a little hit, but then you use something else. You're like, oh, I got them to do it. So you're right. You start to build that up, and it creates confidence, too, as well.
Well, it's interesting. We spend so much time with our clients. We understand with clients and athletes that many of their long-term goals, they're just that. they're long term, and you're not going to see the fruits of your labor, for weeks, if not months at a time. And I think intuitively what that leads you to do as a coach is try to come up with authentic, what I call daily wins for your players or for your clients, whereby you just highlight things that they've incrementally improved and honestly improved. You're not just giving them false feedback here. And I think as coaches and personal trainers and physios or whatever your occupation is, that's what reflective practice is about. It's looking back at your session. I kind of call it the 2+2. What are the 2 things that I did in that session that I want to continue to do? And what are 2 areas where I can just recalibrate and get a little bit better? And from there, every day, you get face-to-face with where you're being successful and face-to-face with where you can be successful in the future. And for me, that's that process-oriented thinking. That's that micro success definition that inevitably leads to your macro success.
Absolutely. Well, what's interesting about this whole thing, and I've told other people this story, is, you talk about, that pillow and going to, can you sleep? Like, are you excited to get up in the morning? And for me, believe it or not, it was one of your lectures when you had to fill in for Mark Verstegen at the Perform Better Summit in Providence that year. And I was sitting there, and you had talked about, guys, you got to figure out what your it is. What gets you out of bed in the morning? What is the thing? And that really changed my mindset in terms of, I need, what do I really love? I love it when I'm helping people, when people come out to me and say, hey, I love the podcast, or I love Strength Coach TV. I watched them all before I opened my facility. And I started to look at my past life and start to say, in the bar business, and what did I really like to do? I like to teach the young managers when they came in and when they were new hires and they had to trail me for a couple weeks. I love that. I loved helping those people kind of become better at what they do. And that kind of changed the course of what I did, that lecture. So I'll turn it around on you now. What is your it? What gets you motivated to get out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it goes back to really looking at what your core values are in life. I think if you as a person really understand what your core values are, what you define as important, in there lies your personal why, or what we're calling your it. And I don't know if you've done this, but oftentimes I think back and say, gosh, obviously there's nature and nurture. So nature aside, the nurture. What was it about my upbringing that really has shaped who I am as a person? What are my core values? And now that I have 2 children, I'm thinking hard about how do I want to shape their experience, especially in their formative years, knowing that inevitably it will influence things like their personal it and their motivation. And when I look back as a kid, the number one thing that my parents hammered more than anything else was honesty, right? So for them, there was something about honesty that as a core value superseded any other value. They felt that if you were honest, it forced you to reflect on all your choices and almost helped you start to calibrate your other values in life. Now, that was just how they raised me. But inevitably, honesty for me has manifested into this search for truth. And that's why, and when I say truth, I mean that in the broadest sense, trying to make sure that the view you have of the world, whether it be through personal interactions with others, evaluating science, evaluating a decision, evaluating a circumstance in front of you, evaluating how you should program design for that matter. For me, what I find really drives me is I seek truth. I want to make sure I have clarity and honesty in my thought, and I want to have clarity and honesty and truth in my understanding of the world around me as best I can. Now, that's how I would answer that question today. For me, that's why, evidence-based practice is as important as practice-based evidence. I love research for the simple fact that it helps me calibrate my personal biases. It helps me calibrate my personal views of the world around me to help me get closer and closer to seeing truthfully what is around me versus something that is manufactured in my mind. And recently I just wrote a presentation that I released the other day on this whole idea of cognitive biases and cognitive illusions. And now right, the motivation behind that is that I like to study where we can go wrong in our thinking, where we can go wrong in decision making, because I want to be as clear in my thinking and as truthful in my understanding of the world around me as possible, not just in my job, but in all aspects of life. The platform that I launched that passion then, Anthony, is through helping others, right? So in deploying this search for truth, my search for truth centers in understanding how people learn, understanding how people get better, and specifically how people get better within the realm of human performance. So, but for me, the core heartbeat, the battery pack of what I do in strength and conditioning lays in the bed of an inner desire to understand the world around me better. And thus my it is truth.
Yeah, I love that. I love that connection to, something kind of like that, something almost intangible to even program design. It's so true. You want to know, am I doing this right? Am I
Yes.
being honest with people? Am I making sure I can find out everything I can to make sure, because I promised these people I wanted to get them better, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure that I am doing whatever is in my power and to do that. I love it. Good job. Nick, within that piece, I mean, look, you have to get where you are, you have to spend a lot of time, whether it's research and lecturing and traveling. You picked your family up and moved to Ireland. It wasn't until probably, maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago where you started to really, we've talked about like through deep work and through a couple other things, like really starting to figure out scheduling and understanding all of this stuff that's coming in. What do you feel like some of the sacrifices that you've made to kind of be successful?
Wow. My wife could answer that question far better than I could. And I guess in me saying that, that's part of my answer. So I think at the end of the day, what we are dealing with is a fixed resource that we call time. And what we have to do always is prioritize how we use that time. And for me, in prioritizing my personal development, insofar as my personal development allows me to help develop other people in our industry, both coaches and athletes, I've sacrificed a lot of time probably with my family. I've sacrificed a lot of time doing other things that one might call hobbies or outside, outdoor activities. We haven't gone on nearly, as many holidays, as we say here in Europe, or vacations, as we would say stateside. In doing that, though, it's never really felt like a sacrifice to me and my family, simply because my wife understands that what I do for me has never been and never will be a job. And just as I support her in her endeavors when we lived in Phoenix to rescue animals through her Animal Lifeline Rescue, or work with kids with disabilities at late nights at the horse riding center that, funny enough, was next door to Exos, she supported me in my travel on many, many weekends, or early mornings, or staying up late, which sometimes, required her to do a bit more with the kids, especially when I was finishing up the PhD. But it all goes back to my wife and I and our family having this shared desire to do good things in the world and to make others better. And at this point in our life, as our children are now older, what we're realizing is the amount of time I prioritized for my career, I want to take some of that time back for the family, which, as you and I have discussed, requires me to be that much more efficient and effective with the time I do deploy to my job and to the development of presentations and books that I'm working on right now. But fundamentally, in my case, what you sacrifice is time with family and personal time, personal headspace away from the work. And for me, those sacrifices were worth it because they weren't sacrifices. They were focus points. They were achieving goals that were important to the values of me and my family. And as we get older, our values probably stay the same, but how we prioritize the deployment of those values is different. And for me, as my children get older, more time will go to them, which requires me to be more and more finite and focused in how I use the time that I use for my personal passion.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, because this isn't always easy. And,
No.
you won't say this, but I will. I know you can write your own ticket. Like anybody would take you at any job right now. You could decide what you wanted to do, where you wanted to do it. That's the bottom line. That's a fact. It's not an opinion. Now, so don't argue with me. So in that time, when you know that sometimes, like you could go get a job and maybe make maybe even a little bit more money and be closer to other family, extended family, et cetera, et cetera. In those times when you're traveling and your flight gets canceled and you can't see your kids play or something, what helps you to get through those worst times?
Wow. You're hitting the tough ones on this one, Anthony. I've like many people, I have become more and more enamored or interested in this whole area of mindfulness, and I will not sit here and even for 1 second pretend that I wake up every morning and do my 20 minutes of silent meditation. I'm not saying that, but I do have the Headspace app, and I do practice mindfulness in various capacities and ways. But the key thing for me is my management of my attention. And when life isn't going your way, when you get speed bumps, for me it's very easy to get into a negative thought process. So what I try to do, to use your example of when I'm traveling, I try to be as present and open-minded as possible. And what I mean by that is, if I'm sitting in the airport, it's very easy just to get locked into your own head and start thinking about, my flight's delayed, this is horrible, that person over there is talking on the phone too loud, that's annoying me, and all these things. And all of a sudden it makes a bad scenario worse. Whereas for me, this whole idea of mindfulness, or just simply being present in the moment, and this is a Buddhist concept, that it teaches you to have basically a non-judgmental thought process. You don't see your circumstance as good or bad. The vast majority of my flights are on time. There's no problems. This just happens to be one where that is not the circumstance. And in doing so, it allows you to see your scenario for what it is, rather than trying to put some label on it as something that is positive or negative. And the second you do that, it's sometimes, or many times if you do it effectively, it diffuses that emotional bomb, so to speak, whether that emotional bomb is positive or negative. But in many cases, it's negative. And we want to diffuse that just so we can be present in the moment. And so I think that's one way where I try to stay calm. And the other piece is, every time I get on a flight, the fact isn't lost on me that if something were to happen, the likelihood of my survival would be quite low. So you have a little bit of a minor existential crisis every time you get on a plane, for some more than others. For me, it's important, and this is almost my litmus test of my life. Can I get on that plane and say, to this date, I have been as good of a father, as good of a husband, as good of a son, as good of a professional as I can? Did I do everything I could to this point? Have I put as much good into this world as possible at this point in my life, in my career? And I would have to tell you, on most flights, I feel the answer to that is yes. And I know if something was to happen to me, that I've maximized what I could do. And I try to live my life to the fullest as best I can. And it's not perfect at all. Knowing that when I get on those flights, which inevitably I do, I can always answer that internal reflection with, yes, I've done everything I can. And hopefully people would say some good things at the funeral. My wife would be able to look back and say, you know what, my husband did everything he possibly could. Sounds a little bit morbid, but for me, it's not morbid. It's simply a way to really reflect back and say, am I doing the things that I want to be doing in life? So I think having that sense of reflection and a general sense of being present and as non-judgmental as we can at moment to moment helps me deal with the ups and downs and the struggles of life in general, let alone flight and travel.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's morbid because I think it's more about an awareness, which,
Yes.
Again, mindfulness, awareness, kind of similar concepts. And, you're just saying, and if you don't realize that, you brought it up before about the sacrifice, it's time. Time is fixed. It's fixed, man. We can't make it we can't bend it anymore. So, it's running out. So, it's a great way to approach it. Well, you said, you kind of talked a little bit about waking up and doing some mindfulness. So I want to get into some of those habits about when you do wake up. And you and I have talked about deep work a lot and trying to block out our schedules and getting routines. Talk to us about, are you an early riser and what is that morning routine that you have if you have one?
Yeah. As we've talked about, reading the book Deep Work by Cal Newport really has been transformational for me in many ways, probably as much in my thinking about time management as it is in the behaviors that it's helped me change or develop. For me, I am an early riser. It is not necessarily natural to me. I want to be clear with that. So it's by choice, not chance, that I am an early riser. And I enjoy getting up when there is silence in the world around me, and definitely silence in my household, because for me it serves to calm my mind and allow me to start today with a fresh outlook. So in terms of what I use that time for, I normally like to start the day with a key priority. So now that I'm working on my book, a lot of that time is spent on outlining and writing and possibly researching, trying to leverage any ideas that I woke up with, that were embedded from the mental struggle that I went to bed with thinking about them the night before. So I try to get all that fresh information out. If I have a priority at work, something that I'd like to get ahead on, I may use the time for that. Sometimes I just need to declutter, and therefore I use the time to go through emails. So every day it's slightly different. It's kind of what's the number one priority for that day. What I then love to do, from like 5 to 6:30 is usually about the time I get before the crow cries, and by that I mean my son gets up. So I like to then go downstairs, and there's something very fulfilling about being able to make the kids and my wife breakfast and coffee. My son likes to use the Nespresso machine now to make the coffee with me, and he goes through every intricacy. So just watching him learn that, there's great joy in that every morning. And then, usually I can get a few more things done, and I run to work, and work starts by 9 o'clock. So, it's kind of how I have personal, I have family, and then I head off to work. So that's usually how I use my time in the morning. And I like that because my wife takes the car, I get this kind of physical outlet that I run, roughly 3.3 kilometers, about 2.1 miles into work every day. And that's where I listen to my audiobooks. I listen to my podcasts. I think I've listened to over 12 books this year. And that's just from the time I have running to and from work most days. So I'm kind of getting a physical and an intellectual primer before my day even begins. And then, the final piece is I haven't done it every day, but I've done it more days than not this year. I really like to start, before I even touch my computer, I read a couple passages out of Ryan Holiday's Daily Stoic. I found that to be a very important book for me in just centering my mindset. And again, getting back to that non-judgmental state whereby things are neither good nor bad. They just are. See them for what they are, and it allows you to move on with your day much more productively.
Yes, Daily Stoic is actually part of my morning routine.
Good.
And that when you were mentioning about it being morbid, that's where I was getting my kind of response from, because I think in November, some of the November passages were actually talking about that, people in your life are going to die, and, you are going to die, and, you're going to mourn. And the best way to do it is to have that awareness and to realize that and to kind of confront it. And it, like you said, it's neat. But yeah, it's part of my routine too. I love it. Good stuff.
Fantastic.
Nick, what about goals? Obviously, with our clients, with people, we talk about, hey, here's your goals. These are short-term goals. These are long-term goals. I know you have goals, but is there a formal process? Do you write them down? Do you review them? Talk to us about that process.
Yeah. This year I did. This year I wrote them down, and I tried to break them into, what were the least amount of big things I wanted to do this year, which for me would be representative of a year well spent in terms of my time that I'm prioritizing. So, for me, it was starting my book, producing a number of research articles, and I don't think I've written as many research articles as I would have liked, but the book has started and multiple publications were submitted. So I feel from that perspective, I was somewhat successful in doing it. In terms of my process for setting goals, it's an interesting one. I couldn't say that I have a day and a time or an exact scientific process by which I approach it. I think it goes back to, again, looking at what your it is, what defines your personal success right now, which again for me is things that are intrinsically fulfilling, and asking yourself, where can I focus my time to get the most out of that, or to achieve something in that space. So for me, everything is right now around how can I help people understand learning. Right now it's learning how to move, but in a broader sense, I want to help people understand the mechanisms that sit behind learning and how they can get better at learning. So all of my goals then are calibrated to that specific arena. And there's many, many ways, many paths I see in helping me achieve that end goal of helping as many people in the world as possible understand the mechanism of learning and how to get the most out of it. So I wouldn't say that I have a single formula outside of once I hit a goal. In this case, it's my book. Everything's about the book right now. Yeah. The second the book is done, I will then switch my focus to the next platform or the next book or the next way with which I can share the information. But I'm a big believer, just like when I teach people how to coach, I talk about, one rep, one focus. I talk about, one moment, one goal. Yeah. So what's my goal right now? And I rather put everything into achieving that goal than distributing my attention over 3, 4, 5 things and inevitably not being able to give full effort to any of them and increasing the odds that likely I don't achieve all of them, let alone one of them. So that's my ramble on it. And it's, as you can see here, I'm thinking out loud a little bit. It's still an area of reflection for me possibly on how to get better at that.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Well, yeah, I think it speaks to the popularity of books like Deep Work, of books like The One Thing, right? Things that are kind of really where the pendulum swung so far in this distracted world where we have to kind of reel it in. So it's interesting that, I think that's how we get you. When you talk to the most successful people, they are a little bit more focused and don't have all of these things going on. Good stuff.
I think, though, if I can say something, Anthony, about what you just said there. Just like you said, the pendulum is now swung, and now people are back to focusing on time management and, goal setting with The One Thing and Deep Work. I just think that's an interesting concept on how, as humans in general, let alone people in our industry, we're so subject to influence by all these various trends. And don't get me wrong, I think the trends you just discussed are quite important ones and are moving humanity in a good direction, helping you filter through all the clutter, all the informational noise that we have to deal with day in, day out. But I think in there lies also something interesting just to reflect on. And that is, are we simply reactive to the world around us? I think the answer is absolutely yes. We're conditioned to react and to respond to the world around us. But going back to some of the comments I made earlier, one thing that drives me is, what's my path? Where do I want this car to go? And really taking ownership of that. And sometimes looking in areas that people are not looking away from where the trends are, not just because it's in opposition to a trend, but because maybe it's interesting to you, and not always being distracted by where the masses are going, where your quote unquote tribe is going, but try to own yourself, own your own vision, own your own truth or your own values, and let those core values and the things that are personally important to you, let that guide your development and your process, not just the people around you or what gets the most clicks.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think there's a balance there because, in a little while, we're going to ask you about some books maybe that you can recommend and some people that you can follow. And
Sure.
That would basically be saying, don't worry about that. Just kind of, follow your own or try to make your own way, right?
Okay, yes. And I think if what I recommend to someone deviates them from the path they're on, and that path is personally important to them, I would want them to bench my recommendations until the time that my recommendations are a part of their path. Good. I think that's exactly what I'm saying. And I would request someone to disregard my comments around the books and the people if it wasn't part of what they said was personally important. I would actually be disappointed if I somehow disrailed someone's current attentional focus on what was important to them to distract them for a short period of time on something that really has nothing to do with where their car is going.
That's an excellent answer because a couple people have not given me really answered that question for that reason. But I think what you're saying is a much better way. Like, look, think about it. I'm recommending these books, but if it takes you off your path, make sure it's in line with what everything else you're doing.
Joe Gomes, who's the head strength coach at the Raiders, was a friend and mentor and colleague of mine early days at Athletes Performance. And I remember one day I went up to him and he said something to me to the effect of, what are you reading right now? What are you focusing on? Forever he was a mentor, someone that always focused on the development of others. And I said, I'm reading Super Training, and I'm reading Bampa's Periodization, and I'm reading Anatomy Chains by Thomas Myers, and I just finished Gray Cook, right? My head was spinning. And he asked me, he's like, why? And I was stunned. I was like, why? You mean why? I'm trying to get better. He's like, but why? Why are you reading these books? And I couldn't really give him an answer. So then he says outside of I want to get better, and he says to me, what is your current focus right now? And I reflected on it, and I said, understanding periodization. He's like, okay, then why are you reading Anatomy Trains? Why are you reading, Gray Cook, or whatever the books I said at the time? He's like, if you're saying periodization is important to you, put all your focus on that. Learn as much as you can about that. Try to give yourself some kind of outlet to then apply that information, whether it's a presentation, it's an article, it's programming for someone, right? And really ensure you put a bow on it, that now you know that information, you've integrated it into your practice before you then go on to the next one. And I think just as easily you could apply that to goal setting as you can to your own personal development. And credit to Joe, that has stuck with me and has helped me prioritize what I focus on in terms of my goals, but more importantly in that example, what I focus on in my own personal development.
Yeah, I love it. It's for years I always kind of listened, was like, oh, I'm going to listen to some Tony Robbins or, they're all good. Listen to this one, listen to that one. And they have some different recommendations. And then one day I just said, I need to just pick a guy, just do what he says, because I'll do a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
And figure it out. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a wonderful book. I'll give you a book on this called Wrapped, R-A-P-T, by Winifred Gallagher. And, she says something brilliant in the introduction. Our lives are shaped by that with which we focus on. Anything that we focus on shapes who we are and how we think. And if you feel distracted, because it's likely because your attention is distributed across way too many things. And the second you get rid of that clutter and you focus your attention on one thing, all of a sudden you're going to feel clarity. You're going to feel your heart rate drop, and you're going to feel success because you're actually able to focus and execute against something long enough to see a reward, to see an outcome.
So true. Good stuff. Nick, how do you stay organized with well, I know one one way you do it because we talked about it. But do you use a planner, and is it digital, analog? Like, what are you doing to stay organized with all that you got going on?
Jeez Louise. I'm credit to Craig Friedman, again, another Exos colleague, who years ago said, "Is your calendar up to date?" And those words, "Is your calendar up to date?" have since changed my life. And whether you're an iCal or you're an Outlook or whatever, my world is shaped in Outlook. So I define work hours, I define non-work hours, all of it is in Outlook. I'm not always good at it, but I use the blocks that I've created in Outlook to shape my day as best I can. Every day before I leave the office, I try to allocate what I will do the next day against my priority list, so that way the second I walk in, I don't have to think about anything. I just go to my first task, which is allocated for a certain period of time, and boom, I adapt, I reprioritize as the day goes on, but it's just kind of this fluid process. So for me, you schedule your work time, you schedule your downtime. It seems a little bit over-controlling, but again, as they discuss in Deep Work with Cal Newport, it actually is freeing, because you always know that there is a place for your attention and there's a place for your tasks and your activity. And with that, you're less likely to be distracted. And if you're less likely to be distracted, you're less likely to go down a path that ends up being this shallow, meaningless work. So for me, it's Outlook. To keep my thoughts organized, I'm a massive fan of having the pocket-size moleskins, which actually are made out of paper, and I use Evernote. Evernote is for me a bit more of the detailed mind mapping type thing. So I have my pocket pen and paper, I've got my Outlook, I've got my Evernote, and I use a couple other digital sticky note type things. But we talk about analog. I like going on my whiteboard right behind me. I write up my schedule, my calendar for the month, and I also annotate to the right of it just the big rocks, the key things I got to check off for that month as well. So I have reminders literally in every element of my life, but the control center is Outlook.
All right, good stuff. Talk to me about recharging you. Well, we know that you got the Headspace app, and that's one way that you're kind of staying a little grounded and trying to keep some of the distraction from entering. But how are you recharging on a daily, weekly, and yearly basis?
I grind until 2 weeks before the end of the year, and then I just sit in a chair silently for 14 days. No. There's a little bit of truth in that.
Drooling.
I think, drooling, exactly. Just looking at the whiteboard, and then all of a sudden I have enlightenment 14 days later. I think there's a couple things. Definitely we try to get better at scheduling our holidays, our vacations. I think that always, trying to get a couple of those a year where you can push yourself for 3 to 4 months, but know that you have, a 10-day stint on the back end of that just to recharge. That really helps break up the year. So I think that's a kind of a macro strategy. I don't do it as much, but music is such a part of my life. As you know, and some of the listeners might know, I do enjoy, DJing and producing mixes. So for me, there are few things in life that are as relaxing or flow inducing as when I'm in my music, looking for music, putting music together, actively DJing in kind of my den area where I have my mixers and everything all set up. I don't do it enough, and that's, in all honesty, probably one of my bigger goals next year will be how I manage my personal time and getting back to doing that a little bit more. But the music, the vacation, but number one, like the amount of joy I get for 10 minutes in the morning with my son and my daughter when we're making coffee with an espresso machine, and how if I rush the process too much or if I don't allow him to put in the granulated sugar, I just love that. And watching my kids, the biggest joy I've had in my life though, my daughter this year, she started karate, stuck with it, got her yellow belt, and she just achieved her orange belt. And in doing this, the 2 days before, she fought in a competition. She got silver in her technique, silver in her one-on-one fights, and silver in her team fight. Then she had to do all of these techniques. She had to do 10 techniques in this long 1 minute long thing that she has to do all these move Karate Kid style in front of 32 kids. And then she had to fight all 32 kids. It's kind of in good fun, but they're fully kitted out, and they have to show that they can endure with their sparring and whatnot. And she got this orange belt. But then the instructor's son said, because of my daughter's hard work, I take her twice a week. We go for an hour at night. I'm not on the phone, nothing. I'm watching her the entire time. In fact, we're going tonight. He gave her one of his medals. She's only 6, right, for how hard she's worked over the last 6 months. And I got to tell you right now, that for me recharged. It's an extra hour at night, but that recharged my battery twice a week. Seeing the joy, seeing the hard work, the discussions going to and from karate. There are few things in life as satisfying as watching your son or daughter on their own accord work hard and achieve something. And for me, man, that's been my joy this year.
Love it. Well, I want to, it's kind of a weird side note, but going back to Craig's quote, is your calendar up to date? If your calendar's not up to date, then you're reacting, and you won't be able to spend that 10 minutes. You won't be able to spend that hour twice a week there, and be able to do what you need to do. Because the blocking out, we talked about this earlier, blocking out I block out my nap, my walk, my lunch, 11 to 12:30 because of the Calendly app. I need people. People are, constantly, we're doing interviews for I have 3 podcasts and trying to do all these other things. And so, I have to put that in now because I'm making sure that no one else will invade that time. So
yes,
if you want to recharge, you got to listen to Craig Friedman. Get your calendar up to date. I love it.
Get your calendar. It's a metaphor for life. Get your calendar up to date.
Nick, let's finish up with the books and the people. 3 books, non-fitness, that you feel like people can help in their development and stay on track with what they think is important.
Wow. Well, because it's a current focus for me, I'm going to have to go with number 1 is a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And as the title suggests, it is simply a book about thinking, written by one of the most important thinkers, if I can use that term. He's a psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, in the last century. And this book is fundamentally how decisions are made. When you wake up in the morning and you want to eat cereal versus you want to scramble some eggs, you decided to go left when you also could have gone right. Just trying to understand yourself, to give yourself a mirror to understand how your mind works, and thus understanding how your clients' minds work, or your siblings, or your wife, or your husband, whatever the case might be. I think Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is just a phenomenal book that needs to be read by everybody. Along with that, there is a very nice book that's along a similar lines called Nudge. And Nudge is written by Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler. Again, these are individuals that kind of live in this behavioral economics, behavior decision-making space. But if you want to help yourself or help your clients make better decisions, and it equally could be applied to the decisions you build around your schedule, it's a very, very nice book that teaches you how to nudge behavior in a way that is almost automatic and unthreatening. It's this whole idea of choice architecture. If anyone's ever heard that term, it was born out of that book. So that's Nudge. So that and Thinking Fast and Slow are a nice coupling. And the book that for me that just jaw-dropping, I walked out. I walked out of it. I got done listening to it, and I was just inspired. Is a book by Lisa Feldman Barrett called How Emotions Are Made. And funny enough, in understanding where emotions come from, why do we call things scary? Why do we say we're fearful, we're sad, we're happy, we're joyous, whatever the word might be? Where do those emotions come from? Where do the labels come from? And in understanding how emotions are made, you truly get a inside look on how you can change your emotional state, hopefully for the better. And also, it, funny enough, relates a whole heck of a lot to the information in Nudge and Thinking Fast and Slow. insofar as so many behaviors and decisions are based on emotional impulse, right? Remember the book by Malcolm Gladwell, Blink? Mm-hmm. Well, this book kind of gives you the battery pack to understand how emotions can hijack behavior and what you can do about it. So that's how emotions are made by Lisa Feldman Barrett. And credit to her. I shot her an email and just honestly thanked her for the book. Responded. We had a wonderful Skype call. Really can't recommend her work enough. So those are 3 books that I would recommend, Anthony, and I think they're not the easiest reads, but they're worth it.
Yeah. Well, I can say for one, Thinking Fast and Slow is definitely on the list because a lot of people have been talking about that book as well. So good stuff. What about some people, Nick?
Wow, gosh, there's so many individuals out there that for me are doing great work. Well, a couple that relate to my selfish area of interest that need a shout out and need to be heard. One is a guy named Rob Gray. Rob Gray is a professor of psychology and skill acquisition at Arizona State University. He has a podcast called the Perception Action Podcast. And basically what he does in such a brilliant way is week over week, he unpacks how people learn skills. So any skill, how to golf, let alone how to sprint faster. And he just does it in such a thoughtful way where he unbiasedly takes information, presents both sides, and provides recommendations, but all the while does it by qualifying where his opinion is and where his opinion is not. And I appreciate the way he treats information in general, and it just so happens it's in my area of interest. So for anyone that wants to know more on how to be a better teacher and how people learn movement and movement skills, I think Rob Gray is fantastic. I really got to give a shout out to Stu McMillan, Andreas Bem, Dan Paff, and all the great coaches at Altus. The amount of work Altus is doing to make our field better is just astounding. Whether it's the blogs and the posts they're putting on Twitter and Facebook, to their courses, which literally are dirt cheap for what you are getting, to the way that when you go to one of their courses in Phoenix, Arizona, you get to watch the people coach all day long and have round tables and have open, honest, robust conversations around how to develop athletes. So Altus as a group, I think, is just absolutely phenomenal. And the final person, the biggest influencer in my life outside of my family is a guy named Sam Harris. Sam Harris has an amazing podcast. His line is this: when people ask him, what do you do for a living? His answer is, I think in public. And this guy is tackling some of the most important but toughest topics right now in life, from artificial intelligence to philosophy to politics. There really is no subject matter that doesn't draw his attention. But again, just like Rob Gray, Sam will bring people onto his podcast. Some he agrees with, some he does not. But he literally is a modern day Socrates, Socratic method, from the standpoint of his ability to debate, have open, honest communication, and be subject to be influenced, to have his mind changed, but also seek to change others' minds. And the way he approaches the clarity of communication, the truth in his thought, and his idea that thinking can always improve, and truth is the number one asset that we ever can have. Everything I've probably told you reinforces why I just find him a breath of fresh air, and thinking in public is what he does, and I hope he long continues doing it.
Love it. Well, I always kind of follow your recommendations for a long time now, and I know obviously I will recommend everybody follow you out there because you've done some great stuff, but you really just scratched the surface. And I know there's so many big things coming with the book and with the books and with so much other stuff that you're doing. And it's been just such a pleasure to kind of follow your career, be part of it, and to kind of be on that journey with you. So, Nick, thanks for doing this, and thanks for sharing your journey.
Anthony, it's my pleasure, and I've said this before, but it warrants repeating. the platform that you have given individuals like myself and so many others is just, phenomenal isn't even the right word. If there was a larger word or more expressive word, that would be the one that I would use, because without you, so many individuals would not have a voice. And while maybe the ideas in their singular form do not come from you, you are the amplifier, and thus just as credible in the importance those ideas have and the influence they have on our industry. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks again, Nick. All right, that's going to do it for episode 265.1 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Parry and the folks over at Perform Better. Special thanks to Nick Winkelman. Don't forget my new book, Be Like the Best. You can get it at continuefit.com or belikethebest.com. You can still get the pre-launch bonuses if you forward me your receipt to belikethebestbook@gmail.com. So make sure you do that. You'll get 10 more of these interviews. You'll get a copy of the Kindle version right away, so you won't have to wait for it if you're getting the hard copy. And we got a workbook coming, so make sure you get in on that. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.